Well, welcome back to another episode of The Compass. And it is December, which means it is Christmas season. Merry Christmas, Dr. Brad Robinson.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. Yeah, I got my full Santa Claus beard going here, so
Yeah, if you, I guess if you gained a little weight and you went to the mall, you might be,
yeah.
you might be
I
confused.
I love it. This time of year, one of my favorite things. I let the beard grow out this long a few years ago. I don't know, for various reasons. I guess maybe a lot of people did. My grandkids was a big part of it. But then I've kept it out. Really, one of the reasons I've kept my beard this long is I love the reactions I get from little kids this time of year.
Mhm.
It's just so they'll be walking and man, they do the double take and turn completely around while they're walking with their parent and they'll
Oh, that's
look
so
at
funny.
me. And I had one little girl last Christmas, we were eating at a local restaurant. My wife and we came in, sat down, and I have a I gotta admit, I do kind of ham it up a little bit. I've got a jacket and a red vest. The jacket's not the full on Santa Claus, but like the jacket's more of a sport coat like this, but I've got a red vest on under it. This little girl, I mean, she stood up in her chair, turned completely around, and just kept staring at me. I love it. I love
You'd
it.
be like, no, I'm just a relative. Like,
Yeah. Kids are so awesome this time of year. I mean, they're awesome all the time, but yeah.
That's hilarious. Well, and I think you bring up some important conversations that we actually want to have today, just talking about some of the tradition that comes along with this time of the year and what's healthy and what's not healthy, and all of the family dynamics that make it difficult for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've talked about various aspects. I think at one point we did one over the summer where we were talking about summer vacations. And I mean,
Mhm.
this is another time of year, the holiday season, it's such an important time for families and family traditions. And I think we can talk a little bit about that today, but also talk a little bit about, how big of a time of year it is for grief and loss and how people um, how people manage through the holidays when they've had losses in their family through the death of a family member or a lot of another aspect of the grief and the hardships this time of year are the loss of the ideal, the loss of the you know I mean, my family doesn't look the way I expected it to. Things aren't
Right.
going the way that I expected it to. There's not, there's hardships or things that are going on. So, I mean, I think those are all important conversations to have this time of year.
I think what you're saying is so important because you're talking about just unrealistic sometimes or unrealized or missed expectations. I saw these memes that were like, what we thought it would look like and what it actually looks like. Or if you talk
Mhm.
about just a baking analogy, what it looks like on Food Network and then what it looks like in my own kitchen when you try to make it. How important is it for people to bring their expectation down to reality? And last night, my church actually had a Christmas party and we did it at this Chinese restaurant. It was a really nice Chinese restaurant, and they had sort of like a side room, and we were over there. And my pastor had put together all these different games and just fun things for people to play. And I kept noticing the waitress was she was actually just watching everything that was going on, and she kept saying like, "Oh, this is so fun," and playing the games. I let her. Each of us was supposed to play. I let her take my turn or whatever, and then afterwards I went and had a conversation with her. I said, I know you're watching because you feel like this is what you want, and you didn't even know that this kind of thing still existed or could happen. And she started crying, and I got an opportunity to pray with her and minister to her. But I could just sense
Wow.
in my spirit, just as I'm watching her, what just voyeuristically really she's looking at. And I could feel that she had this almost hope rising, like, oh, this thing exists and people
Yeah,
get
yeah.
together and they have fun like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that is such a great story and a great kind of segue into so many things that are so important this time of year. Part of it is coming to terms with the sometimes letting go of the ideal a little bit. In other words, being able to kind of go with what is and celebrate and enjoy that. Yeah, I don't know. My mind's going 10 different directions because I know one of the things that I kind of thought about when we were discussing this, I mean, my perspective is as a psychiatrist and a therapist, and I see people from all walks of life, and I'm not, specifically focused on Christian, but here we are at Christmas. And so I got to admit, kind of somewhat humorously, when you and I were talking earlier, I was thinking somewhere in this is this idea that, a psychiatrist and a pastor walk into a bar at Christmas or something, and it's like, there's something in that just makes me crack up. But I thought too, I really, this may be segueing into this quicker than we should in some ways, Tyler, but I wanted to get your perspective a little more on that. So flesh that story out a little bit more from a pastor's perspective of what is it that you see as the Americanized holiday tradition of Christmas, versus what you see as the real sort of central message of Christmas from a pastor's perspective. What's, because I have a feeling that's some of what was going into that story and that conversation you had with that young lady.
Well, I want to honor you too, and just have learned so much by getting to interview you over the past, I guess, year and a half or 2 years that we've been doing this, because there's so many things that I personally haven't been taking the time to stop and do that I am now. And one of them is just embracing the rhythms and calendars that sort of God ordains for us to be in. And I do think it's intentional that you talk about rites of passages for graduation when we were around that time of the year, and family vacation, and now we're at Christmas season, and just saying like, what is the reason that God sort of put this thing in this time of the year for people to come together and do, and then how has, I always use the word counterfeit, how has the culture sort of created the counterfeit version of the authentic thing that God wanted us to have?
Yeah.
And so we see that expressed in a really exaggerated way in our culture, where it's about materialism and busyness. And really the Christmas story is about the opposite. It's about stopping and breathing and being present. That it would be the word Emmanuel, like God is with us, that we can have a face-to-face relationship with the God that knows us. And I think my personal take on it, and you see this in a lot of churches, is that there's 4 things that happen at Christmas time that I think people are yearning for. And it's this hope that Isaiah prophesied, that we'd have a mighty God and a Prince of Peace and an everlasting Father and a wonderful Counselor. And that there is this thing that's beyond ourselves that can connect us and others to him, that we can experience a peace from a divine strength that we didn't know we could have. And when we need help, we can rely on a wonderful Counselor. And that there's an everlasting Father when we don't have that in our own life, and that there's a mighty God that can help us fight against the forces of evil that are encroaching on us. And all those things I think are so important this time of the year. So when you come together, it's like, as a family, and recognizing that God ordained these moments for family units and beyond to come together and say, hey, let's focus that there's a creator of the universe that was born for such a time as our culture needs now, to come together and focus on Prince of Peace, wonderful Counselor, everlasting Father, and mighty God. That's one of my takes on it. And I sense with that woman last night that she was missing out on that family collective unit, and she's missing out on peace and hope in her life.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a cool tie-in to, a lot of the stuff that, I talk about, and like you were saying, the rhythms of life and all of that a simple celebration amongst a group of people playing some silly games and doing some things like that. But there was obviously something, there was a genuineness, there was something that caught this person's attention of, oh, wow, that's awesome. And they felt that connection to that genuineness of, peace and just laughter and joy. And I think that's so important to celebrate this time of year. I guess, whether you approach it from a Christian perspective or not, but that's an important piece of it. How would you speak? I mean, we're kind of flipping roles a little bit, but how would you speak to, because this is what I end up seeing a lot of people that would react to some of what we're talking about and like, well, yeah, sure, right, you know, that's all well and good for you guys to say or for you guys to believe, but in my life, I don't see any evidence of a God, and I sure don't see any evidence of a God of peace or a God of love, you know. And here we are, everybody's celebrating it this time of year, and I'm just pissed. I mean, I like literally, I'm not making this up. I just had this conversation a few days ago with somebody that they're just like, you know, I'm just angry that, you know, maybe there's no God. And if there is a God, I'm really angry at him because of the stuff that I'm going through, you know? So yeah, how would you as a pastor respond to that?
And I think that's a thing that comes up a lot of times during the holidays. I think we've talked about it before, where you were talking about just like there's a seasonal depression sometimes that exists that has to do with less sunlight and cold weather and, you know, the falling of the leaves on the trees where it looks glim. But I think it has to do with holidays and Thanksgiving and Christmas and, you know, and New Year's where families get together and maybe they don't have an opportunity to do that in the fullness that they want to. Yeah. One of the things that I always say, and again, it's kind of a hot take in a sense that you either ascribe to a biblical worldview or a personal worldview. And a biblical worldview would say, like, outside of my own thoughts and ideas and opinions, I'm trusting and leaning on what the Word of God says. So this informs the way that I view the world. And a personal worldview would be like, hey, kind of what happens to me is more formative in the way that I view the world around me and perceive it. And so I ascribe to a biblical worldview. And then when I encounter people like that, you never can win over somebody with an argument. It's more, they have to experience a taste of the goodness of God. So it's like they need to taste and see that God is good. But what I see happen a lot of times is that people blame God for the thing that the devil has done. And so one of the tricks of the enemy is that he digs a hole and throws people in it, and then blames them for the hole, and they think it's their fault. And so they go into this a little bit of a cycle of isolation, and then they begin to blame God for the thing that the devil did. And so I think there's free will, and, you know, people have an opportunity to choose or not choose what they're doing. And a lot of times, you know, people are influenced by forces that are not God. And so evil has to exist so that we can, in our free will, then receive love and give it back to God. And we were actually created by God to be the recipients of his love. And then out of the goodness of what he gives us, we reciprocate it back to him. It's not the other way around. It's like, we don't first love God. God first loved us. And then when we open ourselves up to receive it, a natural response to receiving something that's beyond ourselves, that feels good. It's like this holy thing. Then we give it back to him. And so what happens a lot of times is people blame the enemy or blame God for the thing that the devil actually did. That's my take on it. I told you it's kind of a hot take, but that's what I try to help people understand.
Yeah. No, again, I mean, I appreciate turning the tables a little bit. And again, I'm just kind of giving, you know, because you know, those are things. And I see folks from all walks of life. I mean, the thing that I really, you know, appreciate about what you said too is people need to, it needs to be experiential. Like there needs to be something experiential. And one of the things that I kind of principle, you know, everything we do around here on, is the concept of that we're constantly creating relational space. Mm-hmm. And I would say that that's what's happening everywhere, not just here at our office, but everywhere. We're creating relational space. And I may have talked about this before because it's such a core principle for me, but every interaction, every life, every individual, everything in the universe, you could make the argument is about relational space. There's self, other, there's all this dynamic of relationship. And I think part of the thing that causes so much animosity and hurt and sorrow this time of year is that, I think you called it a counterfeit. I think one of the biggest counterfeits this time of year is what I call nice space. Nice space, you know, nice space is, you know, put a smile on,
Yeah.
put the lights on the Christmas tree, decorate everything, and just smile, 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 even though your heart's breaking inside and you're hurting, you're alone. I mean, I tear up because I've seen so many people this past 2 weeks, 3 weeks since Thanksgiving, that's what they're grappling with. Their heart's breaking inside, but they're trying to put on a happy face. And a lot of what we do here is we help people try to kind of understand the difference between what I call nice space and what I call safe space.
Yeah.
Safe space is a genuine space. Safe space is a place where it's okay to show up, to be present and imperfect. I say a lot, safe space is relational space where it's okay to be me.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to be hurting. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be me. Yeah. Because the relational space, me and the other people that are in that space, we can handle it. We can contain it. We can handle it, and we can offer genuine support. Yeah. And then God shows up, I think, and that's what I say about space. I think God shows up in ways that God shows up. I mean, that's Emmanuel, yes. God shows up in love. I mean, whether you're, a Christian or not, I mean, I would at least hold out the idea that there is evidence in the world around us that there is some kind of genuine love, like, deeper, unconditional love and support. It may seem rare, but I think it's there. I think that's Emmanuel. And so when God shows up in safe space, because we've created room for God to show up in safe space, then that space becomes sacred, which is what I would say happened last night. I mean, you didn't know this lady, you didn't know, and people listening to this might be like, oh, that was really awkward or whatever. Well, yeah, it probably would have been incredibly awkward for her if it hadn't been for the fact that you already had a sensitivity that something was going on, and you were actively involved in creating safe space for her. You let her participate in the thing in your spot, and you created this safety to then have this conversation. And she was tearful and responded to it. It was safe for her to respond.
It was a sacred space. It was a holy moment. I asked her, I said, "Is there anything I can pray for you about?" And she said, "Well, health and wellness." And I just knew that there was something even deeper beyond that. And I said, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" And she said, "Well, I have a really bad problem with alcohol, and I've been trying hard, but I've been clean for a month." And so then she asked if she could come to church on Sunday and get baptized, which she's like hungry for a moment with God. One of the things I've been doing, going back to your statement about niceness, is juxtaposing the difference between niceness and kindness, because kind is actually a fruit of the Spirit, but nice isn't.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yes.
There's a huge difference between those two things. And kindness a lot of times is honesty, and honesty sometimes manifests itself with raw emotions that do need to have a space to be contained and dealt with in a healthy way.
Yes, that's great. That's great. That's exactly what I think about when I think about nice space. And I didn't coin that phrase. I think Jeremy Pincosi did, who's somebody that does some things with us through Sacred Space Ministries. But that's a great way of putting it. I mean, safe space is a space for kindness, but nice is not.
Yeah.
Nice is not a fruit of the Spirit. It's just painting on a happy face and trying to, whatever. I mean, yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. I think at this time of the year too, it's like families can only fake it so much.
Yes.
And I see that happening, and you're like, this thing's hanging on by a thread with these people because they've been faking it and faking it and faking it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I get it. I mean, I think a lot of times, for a lot of people this time of year, you know, it it does feel like I have to fake it. I have to numb. I have to do whatever because they just haven't experienced anything else. It's like I either have to numb and fake it and try to create nice space, or I fall into the abyss of toxic shame or despair, or and that's just a horrible abyss. And unfortunately, for a fairly high percentage of people, the holidays trigger that just as much or more than for a group of people, the holidays trigger that more than it triggers a sense of joy for them. It triggers a sense of guilt and shame and despair and loss, and sometimes they feel like their only option is to numb or be sink in that pit of despair.
Why do you think that so many people have a difficult time forgiving or holding on to grudges? Because
Mm.
it could be like 10 years and they're still mad about something that happened at a Christmas,
Yeah.
you long
Yeah.
ago.
Oh, that's a whole topic of conversation. But I mean, I think that's a great one though, because that's a huge part of what comes into play sometimes too, is the loss and despair and all that. But then, resentment, bitterness, holding on to things. And I think a couple of issues there that I usually think about is that a lot of times people, I think, oversimplify forgiveness, and there's meaningful steps to forgiveness, and that take time, and it takes both people to ultimately get to reconciliation. And then, but some people confuse forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness, I've always felt like forgiveness is more of the one-sided, I can forgive somebody and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to move towards any kind of meaningful reconciliation in the relationship. Forgiveness is the work that I'm doing. Who was it that said it this way? I don't remember, but somebody else has said it this way, that forgiveness is the process of letting go of somebody else's throat. You may or may not. I mean, but you may be very justified in your judgment and your vengeance. In some ways, there may be some justice in it. You may have been legitimately hurt, but forgiveness is letting go of that, and stepping back and going, okay, I'm not the judge and the jury. I'm not God. I'm going to step back and let go of that demand for vengeance. And that's a process that allows you to let go and start healing so that you don't carry the resentment.
Yeah.
But it pays dividends to do that. But for a lot of people, they're like, well, so you're saying I let that person get off with it or get away with it, or you're saying I'm supposed to just, I'm supposed to just paint on a happy face and smile and pretend that they didn't, just, literally abuse me or whatever, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, and that's part of the deal about reconciliation. There are, it requires a lot of wisdom to understand if there is any opportunity to be in a relationship with somebody. Now, again, I'm making a distinction here. I mean, because somebody, offended you because they don't believe the same thing you believe, and then you're angry at them. Okay, that's a whole different issue than somebody who's been very hurtful, physically and emotionally hurtful to you.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is a process of letting go so that you can heal and move forward. You may or may not it may or may not be wisdom or wise for you to be in any kind of a relationship with that person. I mean, if they are still not moving towards health and healing and forgiveness, and it may not be smart to be in a relationship with that person.
And I think that's what complicates sometimes around the holidays, is because some of those people are in your family, and then you're supposed to go and celebrate Christmas together. I heard a quote that said unforgiveness is like drinking a poison and hoping that the other person dies. And
yes. That's a great quote, I think. And there's a lot of truth to that. It really is. But I think the hard part, why people struggle with that, at least what I see here at the office as to why people struggle with that, is they struggle with confusing forgiveness with reconciliation. Mm-hmm. You know, forgiveness is letting go. It's not drinking the poison yourself, hoping that it somehow hurts the other person. You're letting go. You're healing. You're moving forward. You're letting go of the resentments. You're not carrying that forward because it's toxic to you. Reconciliation is a completely, it's another step that really requires the other person to come forward. And that then leads to another conversation that I think is a part of the issue of forgiveness around the holidays or any time. That's our culture, and we all tend to do it naturally, and our culture has just magnified it on steroids with social media and all that. And that is the blame language versus contribution language. We just magnify blame language about everything, and we want to demand, justice around, oh, well, you're to blame for my da-da-da-da-da, as opposed to being able to have honest contribution language about conflict. I mean, conflict. Now, a minute ago, I was talking about more obvious like trauma and abuse, and I see that issue a lot at the holidays. But conflict is not trauma or abuse. Conflict is normal, but we do sometimes tend to elevate it to the level of some sort of trauma or abuse. It's like, no, you just had a conflict with this person over where you were going to get together for Christmas, and they wanted to get together at Aunt Susie's, and you wanted to get together at your house. And okay, well, if you deteriorate into a blame language, then you're magnifying the conflict, and it's going to be hard for you to move to forgiveness, and even harder to move towards reconciliation. If you can stay in a contribution language, okay, we've got a conflict. Here's, if I step back from my emotions for a minute, here's my contribution to the conflict. And if the other person can do the same and be able to come forward and say, okay, here's my contribution. Now we can own that. I'm not owning your contribution. You're not owning mine. I'm owning my stuff. Now we can move towards some genuine forgiveness and reconciliation and problem solve a creative solution to where we have Christmas next year, Yeah.
Fascinating. We have just a couple minutes left. One big topic too that we didn't get into, grief. Yes. I know one time you said it's okay to pause the grieving process around the holidays. Mm-hmm. What's your advice for people that are dealing with grief this time of the year?
Yeah. I think grief through the holidays is such a common thing. And I think finding ways to honor and incorporate, I don't know if that makes sense, but to like you bring it in to the celebration, hopefully if you've got,
here's the pie grandpa would have made, something like that.
Yes, exactly. You take the time. I was talking with someone recently that had a loss, and at Thanksgiving it was so hard for everybody, and understandably, I'm not saying that they did it somehow wrong, but for their family, it was so fresh that it was hard for any of them to talk about it or to cry or to show any emotions. It's hard for them, their family, to show emotions anyway. But I do think in some ways it's also an opportunity missed to at least incorporate, we are celebrating, but we are sad, and we collectively, like, if you're blessed with having family members, even if it's just 2 or 3 people, or if it's 30 people, but if you're blessed with having family members that you can celebrate the holidays with, and a part of that celebration is to be sad together and to celebrate together, Yeah, I think that's important.
Great. I love this conversation. I love the topic that we've had today. Do you have any final words?
No, I think we need to keep working on that, that idea of a psychiatrist and a pastor walks into a bar on Christmas.
There's a lot of places we could take that conversation.
There's a lot of places we could take that conversation. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, if you're interested in having further conversations, you go to bradrobinsonmd.com, or you can call us today at 573-334-7055 to make an appointment. Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Compass, and we will be back again soon.